What up, I'm Adobe and today I'm going to be talking about 10 mods that you might not want to do for your sport bike. The first thing you're probably going to want to do is get rid of your stock exhaust, and you might go for a shorty version like the SC Project or the Kropovich, but here's some reasons you may want a long muffler instead. When tuned correctly, a long muffler might give you a better linear power output. It definitely won't sound as obnoxious as a smaller pipe, and another big advantage is when you crash. Having a bigger, meatier pipe on the right hand side might protect your bike better than an itty bitty shorty pipe if you ever go down on the right or left side. Now this is only if your motorcycle's exhaust protrudes to the right or the left side. If you have something like the Ducati Panigale where the exhaust sits under the motor, this may not apply to you. Now while we're on the topic of exhaust, some of you guys may want to reach right at the top of the shelf for a full exhaust system. But did you know that some sport bikes really only require a 3/4 system? A 3/4 exhaust system is essentially just a catalytic converter delete. The two that I know of right off the bat are the RSV4 and the 2015 and up R1s. In fact, the 2015 and up R1 headers are made out of titanium. They're already super light and a lot of people really don't need to upgrade to a full system on an R1. Now we're still on the topic of exhaust, and there's something that I would like to mention. Carbon fiber versus titanium or stainless steel muffler. Carbon fiber muffler is covered in carbon fiber, and if you know anything about carbon fiber, the quality of the carbon fiber's finish does degrade over time, whether that's the sun, heat, or a combination of everything. Personally, I prefer a titanium finish. It's not only lighter, but the finish will also last a lot longer. Next up, I want to talk about high flow race filters. There's a lot of advantages to a high flow race filter. The first one is obvious. It's high flow, so it's less restricted. Your motorcycle can breathe better, and it'll probably make more power. The downside is it lets in more debris, and if you're using your bike as more of a street bike than a track bike, your engine's just gonna suck up more gunk. Track conditions are a lot cleaner than they are on the street, and for me, that little amount of power that you gain from a high flow filter is negligible. My general rule is if it's not strictly a track bike, I'm just gonna keep the OEM filter because I'm probably gonna ride it on the streets a lot anyway, and taking out that filter to replace it with an OEM filter if I was a street ride versus track ride is going to be too much of a pain in the ass. If you're looking to get rid of your stock OEM mirrors and you want to go with a bar end mirror setup, don't buy those cheap ones that you get from like Revzilla or Cycle Gear. Those are like really cheap knockoffs. The glass on those is not good at all, and it makes it a little bit harder to see. I'd recommend something like the CRG lane splitters, which I rock on a lot of my motorcycles, or maybe something from like Rizoma. You basically want something higher in quality because you want to be able to see. An advantage to the CRG is that the glass is replaceable. If you ever break it, it's super easy to replace and it's super cheap to replace. Some people may want a taller windscreen to deflect air when they're riding, but what I've seen a lot of new riders do is they'll get like the carbon fiber ones or the fake carbon fiber painted ones or like a colored one, and it's solid and you can't see through it. I personally would just go with a light smoke instead of like a dark smoke, especially if you rock a tinted visor like I do. Trying to see out of that at night, it's gonna be really difficult, but I guess if you're not riding tucked in all the time, you could definitely get away with it, but for me it's either clear or light smoke. Race fuel, this is a topic that's coming up lately, probably because of like the straight line racing. A lot of guys use like the MR12 or some sort of high octane race fuel. The issue I have with race fuel is not that it doesn't make power, because it clearly does. You just have to empty out your tank and make sure your lines are free from the race fuel, typically after a track day or after a race day. I don't have any personal experience with it myself. I've always run just pump gas, but I heard it likes to corrode lines, so I wouldn't run race fuel. Some of the things people like to do right away is upgrade their brake pads. If you ride a Yamaha, that's the first thing you should do, is upgrade those Yamaha pads. Those Yamaha pads, once you get some heat in them, they start to feel really woody. What I mean by that is like, it feels like when you squeeze the brakes, your pads are made out of wood. It's something that's apparent in the R6 and the R1, all the R1s I've ever owned. The OEM brake pads are really shitty. But I wouldn't upgrade to a race pad. Here's why. Race pads require a lot more heat to operate correctly. I would stick to something that's like a double H street pad, especially if you're doing mostly street riding. So a lot of people think Olin suspension is the end all be all, and if you're not rocking Olin suspension on your sport bike, you're probably rocking some really shitty Showa or some other off-brand suspension. But the truth is, OEM suspension, especially in modern day sport bikes and super bikes, the ones that are not Olins, they're actually pretty dang good. The internal materials work very similar to an aftermarket cartridge system or a full Olin system. Obviously the materials are not as high of quality, but the fact that you can adjust a lot of these pieces of suspension, whether that's dampening, preload, high speed and low speed compression, etc., etc. I think modern day suspension is pretty dang good, especially if it's fully adjustable. I'd say take it to the track, maybe talk to an expert or somebody who understands suspension well. Try to get it dialed into you, and if you do need to upgrade, then that's when you upgrade. I don't necessarily think Olin suspension is good for street riding anyway. Yes, it might be smoother, you'll have way more adjustability, but I think OEM suspension is, I don't know, it's perfect for the street. No need to upgrade. The last thing would be frame sliders. It's one of those debates that are like, you either rock them or you don't. Some people believe that they cause more damage than good. I have a really close friend who ran sliders on his S1000RR. This was a 2018, I believe, and he crashed during the summer. It was actually in a puddle of water. He just hydroplaned. He was going pretty quick, hydroplaned and crashed. When I saw the damage to the frame right where the frame sliders connected, we both came to the conclusion that the frame would have been fine if he had not run frame sliders. Now, that's not the case with all bikes. I ran frame sliders on my 2015 R1, and I also crashed it, and the frame sliders actually saved it. I was running a reputable brand, Woodcraft. They make like a mushroom style frame slider, which I think is really nice. I don't think it's gonna get caught up in anything. But again, that's up to you to decide, I think, for this one. There's ups and downs to everything, but I hope you consider everything I talked about, and it helps you upgrade your motorcycle. And if you're new to riding, welcome. This sport is amazing. You're gonna meet a ton of nice people. And if you learned something from this video, make sure to spread the knowledge.